You're good.
Good evening. This is November 19th, 2025. I'm going to call to order the public listening session of the Charter Review Commission that we scheduled. We've got a number of our members here online tonight. You can see their names on the screen, but let me just go through the names of the entire commission real quickly so you'll know who participates. I'm Jim Michaels. I'm the chair of the commission. The other members are Sarah Andrew Wilson, Sherry Brett Major, Howard Dennis, Alicia Figueroa, Marvin Lynch, David Knoxheim, Jeffrey Naftal, Michael Persch, Dylan Pressman, and Jorge Quintana. On October 30th, this commission issued a notice that would inform the public that we would be holding two listening sessions today. The first one we held this afternoon in the council chambers in person. We had only one witness speak. The second was scheduled for this evening as a virtual session. We had one person register in advance to speak. That person is not yet signed in. I will be mindful that we do have some members of the public who may view this video after the fact and may have some curiosity about what we're doing and why we're here. And so I'll give a very brief overview, and then we'll see if our witness has in fact signed in. In our notice, what we indicated was that we had one subject matter that we wanted to talk about because it's a topic the commissioners have been studying and looking at for quite some time now. And we've had the assistance of county staff experts from both the county executive's office and from the council staff. And it's because there's been an interest in looking at the county's requirements and policies regarding reserves, budget reserves. As a best practice, governments have to maintain adequate reserve funds so that we could cover potential risks, either dealing with revenue shortfalls or dealing with unanticipated expenses. And that we have two main sources currently in the county for reserve funds. One is the unappropriated surplus of funds that remains unspent each year in our county's general fund. And the other source is are the reserves that the county creates by making contributions to what's known as the Revenue Stabilization Fund, which is a fund that the council created in legislation a number of years ago. Currently, however, we've got a county charter that specifies no target for minimum amount of reserves in any of the funds that the county should have. So we do have, our council is on top of this, and they're aware, however, that we do need to have minimum reserves. And so we do have both council legislation and also a council written policy on reserves that specifies a minimum amount of reserves that is a target. And together, the legislation and the written policy not only set a minimum for reserves, but also sets a method for how to meet that minimum by targeting with annual contributions each year that are directed in law. So that's what we have. However, we have a charter that basically has one provision that says that there's a maximum amount of surplus you should have in the general fund, and that maximum amount is 5%, but it does not target a minimum for reserves overall. So there's a little bit of a disconnect with what the charter says and what actually occurs under the legislation and the council's written policy. So the commission set about asking whether or not we should have a charter amendment that would essentially change that by being more specific in a manner that would sort of direct the council as to what the minimum reserve requirements are, that would supplement the existing law and the policy. And then that raises the question of why you would do that. And the answer is because legislation and policies are subject to change, and county voters might feel more comfortable if the charter addresses it. And then they would know that the legislation or the policy would not change without voter approval, because that's what you have to do if the charter says it and you want to change it. You have to go back for a charter amendment with voter approval. So that's why we're looking into the topic. Looking at the screen to see if we've had anyone sign in, and I don't see anybody.
No one in the waiting room either.
Not in the waiting room. So at this time, we have a number of folks from council staff who have been kind enough to join us this evening. My understanding is that none of them wish to speak. I'll confirm that. Is there anybody who's online here who would like to speak? Okay, not having anybody step forward for that purpose. Let me just say to folks, if you're viewing this video after the fact, if you're a member of the public and you're viewing the video, you do have an opportunity to weigh in and submit views after the fact by submitting written comments. The commission takes written comments at any time. If you go onto the county's webpage, the commission has a page where there is an email address for sending your comments by email. And then there is an address for sending comments by regular postal mail. Either one is fine. I will say that the commission will be taking up this topic further in December and January, perhaps into February or March, but by February or March, we will have to move on to make a decision as to whether the commission is going to make a recommendation to the council. And so by then we will be very prepared to take a formal vote and either make a recommendation or not to our council on this topic. And so you're welcome to weigh in up until that point, and then we will go about preparing our biannual report to the council, which we will submit by the statutory deadline, which is May 1st, I believe. So that's where things stand. If anybody has any questions, we will try to answer them, but you're also free to reach out to me after this session, and I'll be glad to set up a time to talk to staff if you want to get a more detailed feel for what we're doing and what we're working on. Anybody have any comments or anything they want to add? Not hearing anything, we will consider ourselves adjourned for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Good
No
to see
problem.
you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
See you next time.